Lynn, I want to start first with a question that has come from a Democratic senator who's heavily involved in foreign policy questions and in directing the Senate's role in shaping that policy. And he says, Mr. LaRouche, one of the problems that we face here on Capitol Hill is that it has become increasingly difficult for those of us in the Democratic leadership to determine administration policy. As I think you know, last week, we meaning the United States, delivered stern warnings that if North Korea conducted a planned missile test, that there would be serious consequences. The fact is that the North Koreans went ahead and did it. That was over 1 week ago. However, since that time, there has been no indication of how we would respond. There has been no move for resolution within the United Nations, no presidential statement, nothing. At the same time, Secretary of State Clinton was sent off to tell the Russians that no missiles would be placed in Czechoslovakia or Poland, provided that the Russians cooperated with the United States around issues surrounding Iran and other related topics. We were briefed that President Obama indicated the same thing to the Russians during the G20 meetings in London. But then, just a day or two later, the president was off to Eastern Europe, and he indicated quite the opposite, that the United States would, in fact, be placing missiles in Czechoslovakia in order to contain Iran. Then the president came back to the United States. And as I think you also know, upon his arrival here in the United States, we were told that money for missile defense was being slashed, that missiles that had been, that the missile system that had been scheduled to be placed in Alaska was being halted. The fact of the matter is that for us, the issue is not one of agreement or disagreement with the president's policy. For us, the question is trying to figure out what that policy is. This has really created a terrible situation on Capitol Hill. You've been very critical of the behavior of the Democrats on Capitol Hill, both in the House and the Senate. But faced with a situation like this, how would you propose that we proceed?
Well, the problem is that Capitol Hill tries to adapt to what Capitol Hill wants to do. And often Capitol Hill is insane. The very idea of ever supporting this missile thing based in Czechoslovakia, or Czechia, and in Poland, was lunacy from beginning. There's no need for it. There's no purpose. First of all, it won't work. The pretext for this thing was to have a counter to threat of missiles from Iran in Poland. The question whether a missile from Iran could reach Poland. They're not supposed to be too well perfected yet. Now the Russians said, well, why don't you quit that? Let's go some near Afghanistan, and we can probably get an anti-missile system there, which is much more relevant to something coming from Iran. But of course, the issue is not really Iran. The point is, they want to destroy Iran because some people like Saudi money. And the Iranian Muslims have a different religious background than do the Saudi ones. So this is all kind of thing that goes on in this thing. It's completely insane. Secondly, if we understand anything about economy today, you have a certain number of nations that are really responsible. Now, Western and Central Europe is not responsible anymore. Why? Because they don't have any sovereignty anymore. It was taken away from them by the globalization process in Europe itself. No European nation has any effective sovereignty in Western and Central Europe. So don't ask them to make a decision. They can't. They have to wait for orders from London. They can't make their own currency. They're globalized. Now, what do we got? I've set this thing up clearly, and these guys in the Congress should stop trying to bat down loony questions and answers. Yeah, the answer's loony, but the question was lunacy. How can we stop the threat of Iranian missiles by putting missiles in Czechia and Poland? Lunatic. Nuts. I can stop it. Give me the authority. I'll talk to my friends in Russia and China and India, and we'll stop it. It's that simple. We don't need, look, when you're talking about warfare today, think, what is general warfare? It's nuclear warfare. It's thermonuclear warfare. There can be no general war without thermonuclear warfare today. Well, what kind of defense do you want against thermonuclear warfare? In a sense, there is nothing. I was the last one who brought up that question, and I had an answer. They don't like that answer. So they say that, they're saying that Obama's loony. Of course he is. He does not have the capability to grasp certain kinds of ideas. Did we have to throw him out of the presidency? No. Our presidency the system has certain flexibility in it. If the president is confined to working with the system of the administration, of the executive branch, which has a relationship with the legislative branch and the judiciary, we can do just fine. But we have to understand that the president is not the big loony be-all, end-all. And if he's nuts, we've had nutty presidents before. Just look what we went through, this monster we had for 2 terms just recently. A perfect lunatic. Or not perfect, but a lunatic. So if we have we are a presidential system. We're not a parliamentary system. We have some crazy guy who's called a prime minister, or the primed minister. And every time they get unpleasant, they just throw him out, get another one. There is no accountability of a executive response, a system of government, a true presidential system. You have an approximation in France, you have an approximation in Russia. But the way we function, when we adhere to our Constitution, we are not a one-man government. Now, Obama seems to have a problem in thinking that a president is running a one-man government. Ours is not a one-man government. What we have, you know what we have? You realize the power we have in our system, politically? We have institutions of people, some of whom actually serve as members of government. Others, like me, will serve as part of government, but not officially. We're all putting our brains to the wheel, so to speak, to deal with the problems that have to be faced. We all are expressing ourselves up the stream, and what a decision is made in our government when it's functioning, when you don't have a George Bush, for example, and you have a fighting chance in functioning institutions, the president, the government. Well, who's the government? The government is not the president. The president forms a function within the government as the chief executive officer of government. And ours is a presidential system, essentially. But all of these channels work. what I deal with day by day, and I've done it for years now, is working with exactly that system. We have a system, a presidential system, and that's the executive authority. And the president has to be confined within the bounds of the presidential system and the larger system as a whole. The problem with Obama is they're trying to make a nut out of him. They're using his incompetence in whole areas to make him a nut. And when you take this pack of fools exposed by Time magazine and add in Larry Summers, who's a piece of crap in all his own right, you put this crowd in there and you don't have a federal system of government. You don't have our system. You have a bunch of nuts, insane lunatics. They should be kept in cages, not in offices. This pack, a whole bunch, are insane. They're morally insane. They have no affinity to our system of government. They don't believe in our Constitution. What the hell are they doing running our government? They couldn't pass an oath of office. So therefore, what we need to simply is not dump the president. Say, Mr. President, you're now a member of the executive branch. You have the title of president. You will be treated nicely if you behave yourself. It's true. So therefore, you have put him in a position where he has to vet any decision he makes and rely upon advice. Advice, and not just the advice and consent of the Congress, but advice at his own institution, his military. For example, what he did in Afghanistan. He's putting troops in there. This nut. We don't want troops in Afghanistan. We want to get the drug pushers. We don't want to shoot Afghan farmers. We want to close the borders. We want to shut down every sign of a drug traffic internationally. And it's a cross-border operation. You want to push drugs? Don't push it at the border. We'll get you. That's the policy as we're working now on the question of Mexico. We are going to crush the drug trafficker. That's not the farmer who grows the drugs, because the farmer is often a slave, as in South America or in Afghanistan. The farmer who's growing the opium is a slave, living under threat of death and compulsion. He doesn't get paid much for this stuff. He barely makes a living. He probably gets a higher income from vegetables. But they will come in there and force him to take a crop of opium. Then they will take the crop and pay him what they wish to pay him when they take it, and they will move it into Europe. And a crop that's worth $600 on average for a farmer in Afghanistan, when it gets to Europe, will be, some millions of dollars, the same crop. Sold in Europe. What do you want to do? You want to shut that traffic down. Ban the traffic. The drug traffic is killing us just like it killed China in the 19th century. We're going to shut it down. We don't want to put more troops into Southwest Asia to get into wars with farmers and start that kind of warfare. We want to seal the borders. And the first thing, we put George Soros in a cage. He's the world's biggest drug pusher. Put him in a cage. Get rid of him. But the British are running drugs. What's new? They've been running it since the 18th century. International drug traffic. They destroyed China one round with drug traffic. They're trying to do the same thing again to us, to Mexico, to others. The same methods, the same destruction, destroy civilization. So the problem here is that the institutions are not responding to reality. And the reason they're not responding to reality is because they're extraneous things, like the British, who really run the only empire in the world. It's not the British people. They're not even involved on this thing. But the British Empire, as it's constituted, like a business organization, runs the world as an empire. And the only effective challenge to that is from the United States. If the United States has an agreement with Russia, China, and India, you will get other countries will jumping in on the agreement immediately, and we will have the greatest power on this planet concentrated in the cooperation among these nations. and we can solve any of these types of problems. We don't need to start nuclear World War III. I know the situation in these countries. I know the craziness that goes on. That's all right. I know how to deal with it. And I know people in this government, that is, people in the institutions of government in the United States, who also understand this kind of thing. They may not each individually understand it, but if you get them in the same room, the representative lots of people, they'll all come to an agreement because they'll recognize who knows what's going on and who doesn't. And they'll give in to what the person they think they know, who knows what he's doing. So we don't need this kind of problem. We shouldn't get into this issue about these issues. And I know the Senate does that. The House does it also sometimes. But it's nonsense. What we need is a national policy articulated by a national executive, essentially, or institutions around the executive, who are a constant ferment about these things. I know there are people in these institutions of relevance who understand these problems, but it's not getting through this president. He's not getting the message. Why? Because he's got other people giving him the message, people who should not be in government. And our job is we can take this president, we can use him. He can be president. If we function properly, he can be president. So he doesn't know anything. So what? We can make him look good. And he can go out with a good record. That's how we do it sometimes. And I've seen this in corporations, for example. The head of the corporation is a big dummy. But the other people used to make it work. And they all cheered him as a hero. He didn't know a damn thing he was doing. So that's the point. And we should try to formulate our ideas about these things in the right way. We need to have a presidential system. What we know also, the problem here is the Wall Street gang. There's the problem in the Senate and so forth. The same Wall Street gang which robbed us, who do you think the problem is? Who robbed us? Who gave us these hundreds of trillions of dollars of debt, which are now coming down on us? When you add up the score, see how big it is. Because it's a self-expanding debt. Who gave us this cancer? Goldman Sachs and similar kinds of institutions. Well, why do we let them make the laws for us? Why did the Congress pass the laws? Why did they pass the bailout? Why do we get more bailout every time? Why do we loot our people, loot our industries, loot our farmers, loot our medical system? This is breaking down now. Our healthcare system is breaking down as a result of this thing. Why do we let that happen? In order to pay off Wall Street? To pay off London for their ill-gotten gains? The problem lies not with what the senator is referring to. The problem lies in that we get into this mess because we refuse to take the bastards on who we should take on. And then we find ourselves trying to build a fence, a walkway around an issue we wouldn't face up to. Like this thing, how do we handle the Polish bases, the Polish missile base? You don't give them one. They don't need one. Well, they're going to farm with it? Plow the field with it? Whatever.